Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another very special video. This is a full lore movie on the coalition of ordered governments in the Gears of War universe. From the COG origins and history, the government, the military and branches, the COG's dirtiest secrets, the COG Armor, Weapons, Vehicles and so much more. As always, I'm your host Abz. Sit back, relax, and let's dive deep into the full lore behind the coalition of ordered governments.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this shit. I'll get the popcorn.
To the Sirens, war was all they knew. The known Siren history began with the Age of Armageddon. This was when the first two superpowers, the nations of Kashkur and Grasnia, were at war, where they mainly fought with weapons such as swords and chariots. 1,000 years of uninterrupted warfare in which the human race was nearly wiped out. But eventually, humanity embarked upon a period of peace, which was known as the Age of Silence, or Golden Age. This was where Siren civilization began to thrive and prosper, with quality of life improving from the advancement of arts, scientific endeavours and so on. But this era on Sera didn't last very long, as the recently discovered Imulsion led to the Pendulum Wars between Sera's superpowers, the coalition of ordered governments, and the Union of Independent Republics. The Serans never truly knew peace, and so most of Siren culture is based on war. The COG in particular is a militaristic authoritarian force that demands loyalty to the ideals of the state. The 8 virtues on which the COG was founded emphasize the importance of military ideals: order, diligence, purity, labour, honour, loyalty, faith, and humility. This was known as the Octus Canon. Even the COG's holidays are mostly war related, such as Victory Day and the Day of the Fallen, which celebrated those who had perished while fighting for the COG. Sera was actually Ares spelt backwards, and Ares was the Greek god of warfare. For the ancient Greeks, he was simultaneously a necessary and dangerous figure, representing success in war, as well as the destructive nature of battle. This basically sums up Sera, a planet that knows nothing but the destructive nature of war. Although not heavily mentioned, there were signs of religion on Sera. Faith was one of the principles of the Octus Canon, and there were cathedrals seen on Sera as well. The inhabitants of the Aroma Islands, such as Taikaliso, also had their own religion, believing a person's body was sacred, as long as a soul dwelled within. In Coalition society, the army was the focal point, and society in the Gears of War expanded universe revolved around the policies and ideologies that the COG was founded upon. As a military superpower comprising of many member nations, the coalition of ordered governments had different branches as part of the armed forces for their war effort, serving different purposes within the COG military. The main branch was the COG army itself, which was found prior to the Pendulum Wars, and was the main fighting force against the Union of Independent Republics, and the Locust Horde for that matter. The COG army was the focal point in the Pendulum Wars, and fought in many battles across Sera. But with the COG army drawing down after winning the Pendulum Wars, the COG army was unprepared for the emergence of the Locust threat on Emergence Day. The COG counterattack against Locust had ultimately failed. With many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of battle-hardened Gears killed throughout the conflict, the COG was forced to recruit the old, the young, the stranded, and convicts. Of course, they were nothing like the veterans that had died in the Pendulum Wars.
Damn. Talk about a graveyard.
Dirty grub shit all over this place. I got no respect for the dead.
A lot of good soldiers from the Pendulum Wars buried here. Sure could use those men now.
Gear soldiers mostly came from Tyrus, the South Islands, and Kashkur. The Gears were the standard frontline troops, while the recently introduced Commandos, or the Special Tactics Group, were the behind enemy lines Special Forces troops. Then we have the COG Air Corps, which as it says on the tin, was the aerial arm of the COG, which proved vital to the success of military operations. The COG Air Corps provided air support and evacuation for the troops on the ground by use of Ravens and King Ravens. The COG Air Force partook in many major battles in the Locust War, but unfortunately took heavy casualties from the many different hollow creatures that the Locust Horde used in their war effort. From Cedars, Nemesists, Siege Beasts, Brumacs and more that would inflict heavy damage to any air support.
Will we have air support? What? Are you kidding? You are the support, son!
After the sinking of Jacinto at the end of Gears 2, it was difficult for the Air Corps to protect all of the settlements as the COG was too widely dispersed. It became harder to maintain the King Ravens, and so the Air Corps was reduced heavily. There was also the naval arm of the COG, also known as the NCOG. The COG Navy had more success during the Pendulum Wars as opposed to the Locust War. For a time, the Navy lacked the necessary funding and attention compared to the COG Army, but the Defense Select Committee were eventually convinced to provide more funding and supplies, but it was always below the COG Army. The NCOG had special forces for amphibious assaults, and had many naval forces such as submarines, assault ships, and so on. Since the Locust War was a ground war, and supplies went towards the gears, the Navy was left too despaired and abandoned, but it was able to keep fleet formations along with civilian ships. But the Navy proved vital in the sinking of Jacinto in order to evacuate civilians and transporting the remaining human population to Vectus. In Gears of War 3, the Navy was vital in defending Vectus from Lambent attacks, and the remnants of the Navy arrived with the Grozny fleet at the end of Gears 3 to help retake the island of Azura and finally defeat the Locust and the Lambent for good. Then finally we had the COG Engineering Corps, who were the unsung heroes of the war. They were in charge of obtaining and delivering fresh supplies of food and water to Jacinto and the COG Army, so they ran the Northgate farm and maintained the pipelines that carried water to Jacinto. The Engineering Corps were also known as sappers, or wrenches, but despite being of great importance to the survival of humanity, they were underfed due to the COG's policy of only giving high-calorie rations to gears and pregnant women. Gabe Diaz is the most recognisable character we see that represents this branch in the COG. During the Pendulum Wars in the War for Imulsion, joining the army was a norm in COG society and was frowned upon if one did not enlist. Since coalition society was based on a rotating machine, everyone had to do their part, which included fighting in what seemed like an endless war. For the issue of women, some military recruiters tried sexist attacks to get women to join the army. During the 79-year-long Pendulum Wars, much resentment towards the War for Imulsion grew among the liberal youth. The COG and their supporters viewed this anti-war movement as traitorous. The COG used psychological warfare to alter the behaviour of people in enemy-controlled territory, as well as the people within their borders. Airplanes had been instrumental in the deliverance of leaflets over enemy territories. Humanitarian air missions, in cooperation with leaflet propaganda, were also successful in turning civilians against enemy leadership, whilst preparing them for the arrival of enemy troops. Leaflets and posters stating that the COG were fighting to prevent UIR enslavement, calling the UIR mad brutes, and other ideals to sway the minds of the civilians. The COG also used propaganda throughout the Locust War as well. One of the well-known ways that the COG did this was named Operation Lifeboat. 9 years after Emergence Day, the COG army was overstretched, and so Operation Lifeboat was the brainchild of the COG Department of Conscription, which involved the conscription of stranded civilians into the decreasing COG army in return for transporting their families to more secure regions in Jacinto. They were also promised 3 meals a day and a roof over their heads. This encouraged many stranded men to seek better lives for their families. Damon Baird noted that the new stranded recruits looked more like prisoners of war than new recruits. Most of the stranded rejected Operation Lifeboat, remembering that the COG abandoned them during the Hammer of Dawn attacks across Sierra in 1 AE, while some of them chose to join the COG army in hopes of saving their loved ones from famine, diseases and the Locust Horde. Two notable Gear soldiers who partook in Operation Lifeboat were Dizzy Wallin and Michael Barrick.
How many? Did any of them make it?
I'm not sure.
Damn it. We couldn't even protect an evac point with kids in it.
The COG does what it can for its people, Corporal. That's why we're here. Keep moving.
The COG does what it can for its people? Well, I'll tell you what the COG did for me. The COG blew up my house. The COG destroyed everything I had. And when I was stranded and had no other choices, the COG gave me a gun and sent me here to do the same thing to someone else. This was your home once, Val. It's the COG doing what it can for you.
During Operation Hollow Storm, the COG army mobilized thousands of Gears for the assault on Landdown. Operation Lifeboat conscripts played a vital role in Operation Hollow Storm, where several conscripts were the direct drivers of frontline Gears, so the stranded were kind of used as sacrificial lambs by the COG, doing frontline dirty work, and this is also why Dizzy drives you to Landdown in Gears 2 in the Assault Derrick, since he partook in Operation Lifeboat. Unfortunately, however, many of the newly conscripted Gears found life in the military more difficult than expected, and the benefits of Operation Lifeboat were overwhelmingly exaggerated. While some conscripted Gears found life harder in Vectus, as they were viewed as stranded and not Gears in the eyes of the locals, while other stranded simply refused to fight for the people that burnt down their homes and killed their families. There was also a time in the aftermath of the light mass bombing at the end of Gears 1, where the coalition of ordered governments believed that the war was over and therefore dropped leaflets in dozens of stranded controlled cities, promising them a new era of peace and asking to join them in the rebuilding of civilization. This was in order to sway the views of the stranded after everything the COG had done to them. The hope was that the stranded would abandon their independent mindset and remove all fears of a civil war in the human society. In the words of Chairman Prescott, the coalition of ordered governments was a strange beast to control. It was a global alliance. Heads of COG states had to want to cooperate, or at least fear the wrath of the others if they tried to break ranks. The coalition of ordered governments was headed by the chairman, who was elected by the Council of Sovereigns in the COG capital of Ephyra. The Council of Sovereigns took place in the House of Sovereigns, and this held the office of the chairman and was the central command for the military branch. The House of Sovereigns was located in Embry Square, and this was the entertainment and commercial centre in Ephyra, which became the political and economic headquarters of the International Alliance after the establishment of the coalition. Embry Square was named after Allfather Prime and founder of the coalition of ordered governments, Nasser Embry, who founded the COG on the ideals and concepts of socialism. But who exactly were the Allfathers? Now, they were the founding fathers of the COG during the fuel crisis that predated the Pendulum Wars. They were the heads of state of emulsion-rich nations that united under the Octus Canon, the founding document of the COG Collective, which outlined their utopian vision for society. Inside the House of Sovereigns meeting chamber were statues representing the 8 moral principles outlined in the Octus Canon. Unfortunately for the COG, the House of Sovereigns was attacked in the initial onslaught on Emergence Day, but it was quickly defended and secured. The house continued to be operated until 10 years after Emergence Day, when the Locust Horde won the battle in the COG capital of Ephyra, and the last known operation held within the house was the trial of Marcus Fenix.
This building used to be a beautiful place. There's a lot of history here.
A lot of lies, too.
Well, you've got some nerve, soldier. I know all about your trial.
His trial was a sham, sir.
The House of Sovereigns was then abandoned as the coalition relocated and turned a former hospital in Jacinto City into a military base, known as Recruitment Base. This became the COG's new capital building, as the House of Sovereigns was then occupied by the Locust for 4 years until 14 AE. The chairman of the COG had authority over all the armed forces of its member states. The second in command and the second highest executive figure was the deputy chairman. There was also a cabinet where individual departments were created to support specific areas of the COG. Of these departments, The head of each was a part of the cabinet. The COG Defense Department was the department in charge and in authorization of the overall defense purposes of the COG, as well as having overall command over all of the COG armed forces. The Department of Health was set up to protect the health of all COG citizens, providing essential human services and maintaining their ambulance services. They also ran the New Hope Research Facility before it was shut down. There were also many smaller agencies that were smaller than the departments of the COG, but some of these agencies had huge pivotal roles in the COG and its society and military. One agency was the Defense Select Committee, which had the responsibility of drafting legislation pertaining to defense-related issues. They also had the responsibility and authorization of drafting any new weapon, vehicle, or tool that would be used by the COG armed forces. The COG Intelligence Agency, or COG Intel, was an agency responsible for gathering and presenting information on the safety of the COG and intelligence about their enemies. As Colonel Hoffman would say, everything is on a need-to-know basis. The COG Defense Research Agency was in charge of designing and developing weapons, and also produced military technology for the armed forces. One of their most noticeable creations was of course the Hammer of Dawn, as well as other creations such as the Light Mass Bomb and the Sonic Resonator. Despite its socialist ideals, the COG had authoritarian characteristics, using mass propaganda to conform citizens to the ideals of the COG, even controlling the syllabus in schools to heavily teach the political ideologies of the COG. They even used fraudulent elections. Now, elections were not always so fair, sometimes a complete sham, and the COG's authoritarian government used their judiciaries to manipulate or control elections. The Council of Sovereigns had the deliberate power to elect a candidate for the position of chairman, therefore establishing their own legislative agenda. Order was everything in the coalition of ordered governments. Order not only had to do with the government, military, as well as civilian sectors, but also had to do with recording, archiving and bookkeeping of records and documents that encompassed everybody in the COG. Every file, every document, and every report was recorded in a ledger and stored away. Even when the COG was in a significant crisis, such as the Locust War, COG officials recorded and kept records of everything that happened. This archiving and filing not only had to do with history, but anything and everything that was a record, including reports, seismographic charts, photographs, maps, schematics, and technical journals. The coalition of ordered governments, at face value, may be seen as the ultimate supranational alliance of military leadership, but the COG were no saints in the slightest. Some of the things about the COG are outright evil, disturbing, and things that are way worse than what meets the eye. Built during the mid-Pendulum War era, Azura was an island and was designed as a bunker for the COG's elite in case of a global holocaust. The bunker was fitted to be an island resort for the wealthiest and most elite of the coalition. Sometime after the Pendulum Wars began, the COG began to kidnap scientists for study in the possible cure for Imulsion, for the research they would conduct outside of Azura would cause a leak of the information regarding the Imulsion parasite. This led to public speculation as to where the scientists have gone, and several tabloids were correct on the fact that a secret island is holding these missing few. Some, however, were volunteers. In fear of Azura being compromised by Locust or human, Prescott had Adam Fenix build an adaptive atmospheric manipulation system, or better known as Maelstrom Barrier. This device would create an artificial hurricane storm around Azura Island to make it impassable for sea and air transport. Strong altitude vehicles were used as transport.
Keep your mind.
This is all I can recover.
I've tried to contact you over the years, but I've been held prisoner at Azura since Prescott abducted Azura. Keep your mind on the Imulsion countermeasure. That's all that matters, sir. I've been at Azura since Prescott abducted me from the estate. Prescott abducted me. And I'm
Fucking Prescott! God damn him!
The Birthing Creche was a program established by the coalition of ordered governments to put members of the female population into a series of breeding, quote-unquote, farms. These were facilities where they'd be impregnated in order to repopulate the human race. Following astronomical loss of human life upon the outbreak of the Locust War, the COG chairman, Richard Prescott, was forced to establish the Birthing Creche program, alongside the other provisions brought forth by the COG for the war effort. Under the Fortification Act, all males were placed in the armed services and women in war work, which often consisted of non-frontline roles such as pilots, medics, or factory workers. The majority of the women and girls who did not participate in the aforementioned roles but were able to be impregnated would both voluntarily and otherwise be sent into these quote-unquote farms. Women in the Birthing Creche were given extra rations over a non-serving male, and doctors gave young girls hormones at age 10 so that they could begin menstruation. The women would become impregnated through artificial insemination or sexual intercourse. Ideally, the goal was to have the women become pregnant with genetically strong offspring, and so the women in the farms were often partnered with Gears, as they were a lot stronger and bigger than your average male. Of course, this system would prove to be deeply flawed, as the farms were hostile and abusive environments towards the women and girls kept there, such as the farm in Ghislaine. The farms would be likened to prison facilities in stock, and rape by the farm staff would be a common occurrence. Women would even be offered to the most decorated Gears and undergo artificial insemination forcefully. So this was of course disgusting, and the abuse led many of the women traumatized. Like Molly, and to a lesser extent Alex Brand, women who were found to be unable to get pregnant, so barren, would be sent away to contribute to the war effort in some other capacity, such as combat roles. Leirin Prison was one of the many COG prisoner of war camps that was operated during the Pendulum Wars. It held prisoners from the Grozny army who suffered abuse at the hands of the Gears guarding the facility. Some prisoners were burnt with hot plates, while others had their hands cut off. Half of a captured Grozny regiment starved to death within the fort's walls. The Grozny soldiers who survived their time in the facility carried scars with them for the rest of their lives, with some of them holding a grudge against the COG for their horrific treatment. The COG government of course never told its civilians or the rest of the armed forces about the war crimes committed against the Grozny, with details about Leirin Prison only coming to light during the stranded insurgency on Vectus, when the remnants of the Republic of Grozny joined the COG on the island. One survivor of the prison showed photos of the crimes there to Sergeant Marcus Fenix, who was horrified at what the Gears there had done. During the Pendulum Wars, Dr. Niall Sampson became a renowned scientist in Tyrus under the Coalition of Horde governments. He later maintained a high position under the Coalition's Department of Health. Recognized for his accomplishments, the Coalition invited Dr. Sampson to Azura. As resident and researcher on Azura, Dr. Sampson helped build Azura into a place of solitude and ingenuity. As such, his voice was used as inspiring public announcements to encourage the work of other scientists at Azura. Meanwhile, on the mainland, the miners of Imulsion and their families began suffering from a new fatal respiratory condition called Rustlung, caused by the overexposure of Imulsion vapors and fumes. Due to the Coalition of Horde governments gaining economic and political power from occupying the majority of Imulsion reserves, the chairman at the time, Chairman Monroe, demanded complete confidentiality regarding its health effects in order to prevent repercussions of releasing a toxic fuel source to the public, and thus losing political power over Sarah. The Department of Health then designed the New Hope Research Facility in order to house and treat the children of Imulsion miners sick with Rustlung. Of course, based on his previous work, Chairman Monroe appointed Dr. Niall Sampson as director of the New Hope Research Facility, leading the research into finding a cure for Rustlung. However, unfortunately, Niles believed that with Imulsion, DNA could be manipulated into evolution, using the DNA of indigenous creatures from the Hollow, believing they held genetic immunity to Imulsion. Dr. Sampson mutated the children with it in order to cure them of Rustlung. The children then unfortunately transformed into aggressive, genetically unstable specimens Niles called the Sires, seeing them as the forefathers of an evolutionary superior race. Shortly before the shutdown of New Hope and his appearance at the House of Sovereigns to stand trial, a fringe element within the Coalition personally reached out to Niles. The party revealed that they have the best interest of the Coalitions in mind, but are pragmatic in their efforts, criticising Chairman Monroe for his moralist ways interfering with true progress. They not only believe that Niles' work could end Rustlung, but also create genetically engineered super soldiers to help end the Pendulum Wars against the UIR. Niles agreed to the invitation, and the COG Fringe Party used nethercut mining to build a secret facility at the base of Mount Kadar. There, Niles could transfer his remaining loyal scientists and all of his subjects and work without ethical restriction.
Long time ago, I got posted to a genetics lab. They were supposed to be curing rust lung. It went sideways.
I just wanted payback. For all the shit the COGs made me do.
Chairman Prescott was very secretive of classified information that could potentially damage or destroy the COG should anyone find out, and was willing to kill anyone to keep the truth buried. Prescott, along with Adam Fenix, were some of the few Sirens that knew Queen Myrrah existed, as well as the true nature of the New Hope research facility. Despite having knowledge that could have potentially helped the COG win the war faster, Prescott instead used whatever resources available to instead cover it up. When Sergeant Gabriel Diaz confronted Prescott about the existence of New Hope, Prescott attempted to kill him and Sid Redburn with a Hammer of Dawn strike, in order to cover up the truth, rather than sharing what he knew, which could have potentially helped them to kill Ukon, a major threat to humanity. At the same time, Prescott put humanity at further risk with his cover-up attempt, because Diaz and his forces were attempting to kill Ukon, a vital mission that Prescott himself had given them. It was only during Operation Hollow Storm in Gears of War 2 that Prescott declassified the file concerning New Hope out of desperation to find the Locust stronghold, Nexus. However, he simply classified it as a decommissioned COG outpost that held potential answers, and refused to reveal the exact details of the connection. Similarly, Prescott hid the truth of Imulsion and the Lambent pandemic from Colonel Victor Hoffman, despite repeated attempts to get answers from him. As a result of Prescott's lies and cover-ups, Hoffman ultimately lost faith in his leadership.
Excuse me, sir, but what the hell? Just declassified? And what do you mean, a Locust Queen?
Everything is on a need-to-know basis, Sergeant, on direct orders from the chairman. You have your mission, now get to it. Command out.
Anybody else's bullshit detector just go off?
Marcus, man, this shit sounds sketch.
If Hoffman didn't even know about this place.
The Elite Special Operations Unit in the COG Army, a mysterious and deadly unit that served directly under the head of the Coalition of Ordered Governments. Trained in the Onyx Guard Academy of Halvo Bay, this unit was formed of loyal and battle-hardened gears, as well as new Onyx Guard cadets. The Onyx Guard had its own air wing, tank battalions, and troop regiments that were capable of fighting on the front lines and behind enemy lines. The Onyx Guard symbolized the elite of the COG, tasked with dealing with classified information and COG files, such as being stationed at the elite COG bunker on the hidden island of Azora, protecting the resources and people who were there. The Onyx in their name was because of their synonymous Onyx black armor and equipment, even utilizing black King Ravens as transportation, although they did carry the standard issue COG armaments, such as the Lancer and the Nasher. However, the Onyx Guard unit had more funding allocated to them compared to the rest of the gears. This is shown by the higher quality and technology of their armor and equipment. For instance, the Onyx Guard armor is far stronger and more durable than the standard COG armor, and their suit covers the wearer completely as opposed to the other COG armor sets. Their equipment was more advanced as well, such as equipping stim grenades and beacon grenades as part of their arsenal. Now, there are some key moments from the Locust War that the Onyx Guard were involved in. They were led by Colonel Ezra Loomis, but 6 weeks after Emergence Day, the Onyx Guard's training facility, which was known as Halvo Bay's Military Academy, was taken by the Locust, and all of the Onyx Guard cadets were slaughtered. 9 years after Emergence Day, the city of Alima was evacuated due to an attack by General Ram and his forces, in order for the Locust to gain a foothold on the capital of Aphera. The COG could not afford to lose Alima, and so Chairman Prescott ordered the Onyx Guard to deploy into the city to try and kill Ram. After learning that the Onyx Guard were coming, Zeta 6 noted the strangeness of the Onyx Guard being sent in to help with an evacuation, since they wouldn't tend to be involved with these types of missions. Members of the Onyx Guard located Ram and his bodyguards, protecting a tremor. Dozens of Onyx Guard gears dropped in around Ram from the surrounding buildings, and a King Raven, including 2 in silverbacks. However, they were all slaughtered by Ram and his bodyguards. During the fall of Aphira years later, the commander of the Onyx Guard, Paul Jory, along with his team, went to Haldane Hall to pick up Adam Fenix, essentially to abduct him and relocate him to the island of Azora under their protection, in order for him to continue his research. Adam was injected with a sedative and taken to Azora. Of course, Marcus Fenix and co had thought that Adam Fenix was dead, but they found out years later that this was not the case. This is the type of classified information that the Onyx Guard were involved with, at the sole discretion of Chairman Richard Prescott. Several years after Emergence Day began and the Locust War raged on, the Onyx Guard were assumed to have been wiped out, much like many other units, but in reality, they were relocated to the island of Azora to protect the social elite and key scientists of the COG, such as Adam Fenix, of course, while the standard gears took the fight to the Locust, and took many casualties. But in the first battle of Azora, when the Locust finally located the island and attacked, the remaining Onyx Guards were slaughtered, and the island fell to the control of the Locust. Some of the survivors were scattered, and all of the scientists and social elite were killed by the Locust, with the exception of Adam Fenix, as Queen Myrrah wanted him to finish his task and deal with the Lambent threat once and for all. Chairman Prescott had 2 Onyx bodyguards assigned to protect him at all times. When Prescott returned to what was left of the COG in Gears of War 3, Damon Baird named them the Onyx Guard Rejects. Unfortunately, they were killed alongside Prescott when they came under Lambent attack. A few side notes are that the Onyx Guard were always shown to be very arrogant and aggressive in their behaviour, such as pushing away members of Delta Squad after arriving with Chairman Prescott, or pushing past Sophia Hendrick, an Onyx Guard cadet. And in the art of Gears of War 3, the concept artwork of the Onyx Guard referred to them as Stealth COG, which was a temporary name for them during the development of Gears of War 3. The design of the Onyx Guards was supposed to walk the line between noble soldier and frightening or authoritarian stormtrooper. The gears of the COG were equipped with signature weapons throughout their conflicts against the UIR, the Locust Horde, and the Lambent. Many of their weapons were also stolen and used by the Locust Horde to wipe out many gears with their own manufactured weapons. The COG's standard issue shotgun was the Nasher, a short-barreled, stockless, lever-action military shotgun that was very reliable for the gears in close quarters combat. It did lack the necessary range of rifles, but it packed devastating power, being able to gib many Locust forces into a shower of blood and gore. The Nasher originated in the COG, but a common theme, as you will see in this video, will be the ultimate fact of weapons falling into the hands of the Locust Horde. So, for the Nasher shotguns, they also fell into the hands of the aggressive Locust shock troopers, the Locust Grenadiers, who used the Nasher to deadly effect against the COG in close quarters combat. The Lancer Mark I, or also known as the Retro Lancer, this was the predecessor to the iconic Lancer Mark II that was equipped with the chainsaw bayonet. The Retro Lancer was the extremely powerful main assault rifle used by the COG against the UIR in the Pendulum Wars. The Retro Lancer was effective against the Indies, and therefore the weapon saw very few modifications during the war, since it was a reliable weapon in a wide range of climatic conditions. The bayonet was effective against human enemies, but as the Locust War commenced on Emergence Day, the Gears soon found out the hard way that their bayonets couldn't penetrate the Locust's thick hides, causing the bayonet to deflect away or snap off as a whole. The Retro Lancer had a slower fire rate and massive recoil, with a low ammunition count, so this made the Gears very vulnerable in quick and violent close quarter combat attacks from the Locust troops. In the words of Marcus Fenix, "These blades are fucking useless. We need something that actually cuts these assholes." So this nicely leads us to the Lancer Mark II. Shortly after E-Day, during a battle, Ty Kaliso improvised by using a nearby power saw to shred and kill a Locust soldier. So Marcus Fenix discussed the idea with his father, Professor Adam Fenix, and soon after, the Mark II Lancer assault rifle was developed, incorporating more accurate fire, less recoil, a reticle sight, and a devastating chainsaw bayonet, but at the cost of lower firepower compared to the Mark I. Therefore, the Retro Lancer was 90% completely phased out over a year later, and most COG battalions were outfitted with the new Lancer. Now I'm not gonna lie, there is a slight bit of confusion with the Lancer Mark II's origins. Now this is ultimately because of Gears of War Judgment, which took place during the destruction of Halvor Bay, only 6 weeks after Emergence Day. In the game, they are seen with Lancer Mark II's, but this was earlier than when Ty and Marcus brought forward the idea of the Lancer chainsaw bayonet. But I'm guessing that this was done in Gears Judgment for gameplay purposes. Moving on to the satellite-based orbital laser by the name of the Hammer of Dawn. It was first used as a strategic weapon, as a deterrent by forcing politicians to rethink their decisions, but would eventually be forced to become a tactical weapon for asset denial and tactical operations in the Locust War, as the Locust quickly advanced on the COG capital of Aethera. The Hammer of Dawn counterattack burnt 90% of Seira, killing almost every Locust or human that was still on the surface and outside of Jacinto city limits. It was an extremely destructive weapon, but one drawback of the weapon would be that it could only be used to paint a target only if there were clear skies overhead. At times there would only be minutes or seconds of satellite coverage, and in war that can be the difference between life and death. The COG's high caliber, single shot bolt action sniper rifle was known as the Longshot, able to do lethal damage per hit. The Longshot originated way back in the Pendulum Wars, as the COG used these sniper rifles to counter the UIR's GZ-18 Markser rifle. The Longshot shifted the rules of combat drastically, allowing a skilled sniper to remain uninjured or even unseen during firefights, able to inflict critical damage to anyone unfortunate enough to be hit by a Longshot round. A headshot would cause the head to burst into smithereens. Unfortunately though, the Longshot sniper rifles also found their way into Locust hands. Therefore, the specialised Locust drone class, known as the Locust Snipers, had emerged, able to cause brutal damage to the gears from long range. The gears were also equipped with a standard issue combat knife for close quarters combat melee situations. It wasn't as useful on the Locust due to their thick hides, as the Retro Lancer bayonets were an attached combat knife that could be taken off, but of course didn't have a good success rate against the Locust forces. Due to the Lancer chainsaw bayonet, it kind of made the combat knife redundant in melee combat, but the combat knife could always have been useful for other situations. But Dom and other commandos had a specific commando knife, also known as the fighting knife. The COG commandos were given these knives as part of a sign of their completion of training, and to use in the field, with Dom being very proud to earn his commando knife. Dom was always seen to have the knife in a holster on his armour during the games, but after Dom had unfortunately died, Marcus took it upon himself to personally put an end to the Locust Queen by stabbing her with Dom's commando knife. Hoffman received a machete during the Pendulum Wars. This was a machete used by the Pasanga Gears. They were from the country of Pasang and had a great reputation. This was used by the Pasanga Gears to defend themselves and their womenfolk. The standard primary sidearm for the COG was the MX-8 snub pistol. It lacked the range and power, but the snub's quick fire rate made it reliable in certain situations. While most gears continued to use the snub pistol, some gears were known to loot and use bolt-up pistols from the fallen Locust, as they were impressed by the gun's power and design. However, many gears still continued to use the snub pistol for its high rate of fire and higher ammo capacity. Even Chairman Prescott carried one to protect himself whenever he was in danger. A heavy hand-cranked Gatling gun manufactured by the COG was the Mulcher. This was a scaled-down version of a chain gun. It possessed phenomenal firepower and a fire rate fast enough to keep an entire platoon pinned down. For refined firing, the user can deploy the Mulcher's base, turning it into a mobile turret with a 180-degree field of fire. Many Mulchers fell into the hands of the Locust, and therefore the specialized boomer class of Locust, the Locust Grinders, would rotate the crank and fire at will to suppress against COG soldiers until it overheated, unleashing heavy, unrelenting damage on the gears. The COG had a man-operated mortar in order to keep foes pinned down and deal with large amounts of enemies at once. The highly explosive cluster shells would rain down along the mortar's firing line, scattering a series of bomblets on enemies. The effect the mortar had on enemy morale was dramatic, as enemies would flee for cover rather than being caught in the blast radius, and if they don't, they were likely to be killed, if not seriously wounded. The mortars were designed and built by the COG, but the Locust Horde managed to salvage some mortars and made use of them whenever they could. Locust drones and snipers were seen to be using them. The Scorcher was a portable flamethrower, able to gush a stream of flames that would damage and set enemies ablaze, literally scorching them to death, hence the weapon's name. The Scorcher was a very deadly close combat weapon, with its continuous spraying of flames. The Scorcher is also the most accurate weapon to blind fire, and has a psychological side effect of inducing fear and panic in enemies at close range. The Scorcher was also compatible with a backpack fuel tank that increased the fuel capacity, but this would be vulnerable to damage due to their flammability and would explode if it was lit up with gunfire. The Scorcher weapons that found their way into Locust hands led to the specialized classes of flame drones, flame grenadiers, and even flame boomers. These units wore specialized helmets and backpack fuel tanks. An extremely deadly, lever action, recoilless heavy sniper rifle was the one-shot. It had an incredible range, and was known for its prominent laser sight and lethality. One round from this gun was able to explode larger Locust units, like the Reapers and Maulers, and turn them into a shower of blood and gore. The weapon really did live up to its name. The Locust were also eventually able to use this devastating weapon, but the only problem with this weapon is that it had a long reload time, and the visible laser while aiming could always give away the operator's position, giving the opposition the window of opportunity to return fire and kill the operator. Next, we have the sawed-off shotgun, a double-barreled lethal shotgun that packed enough power to kill multiple enemies, or even larger enemies at point-blank range with a single shot. This was due to it being able to fire both barrels simultaneously. Now, it was only mainly effective at point-blank range, but unfortunately, the sawed-off shotgun had a painfully slow reload time, and therefore would leave the operator very vulnerable during this time. The COG had the mounted, heavy Gatling gun, known as the chain gun. It was usually seen on vehicles, however it could also be used as a stationary emplacement gun on fortifications for defense. Because of the gun's size and mass, it was far too big to be moved by any soldier. Therefore, whenever not on a vehicle, it was a mounted defensive gun. But the COG had a slower rate of fire autocannon by the name of the twin barrel turret, installed for defensive purposes, and it used two barrels that alternated shots to allow them to cool, and each barrel received its own separate belt of ammunition. After a prolonged period of firing, it became temporarily inoperable while it cooled down, and this turret was actually used by both the COG and the UIR. The gears also used RPGs in the Pendulum Wars, used in a variety of ways to cause heavy amounts of damage, including being used as anti-vehicle weapons. Another Gatling gun used by the gears was the Vulcan. Now this was an extremely heavy weapon, and therefore required two coordinated gears to use the Vulcan effectively, being able to shred Locust forces like the boomers to bits in the blink of an eye due to its ferocious fire rate. As Marcus would say, nothing but bits. A speciality weapon used by the Gears was the tripwire crossbow. This would fire an explosive, charge-equipped bolt that would stick to surfaces and would emit an infrared tripwire beam. Although when you shoot an enemy directly, the bolt would stick to the enemy and could be used as a moving mine. The COG used the designated marksman rifle in the Pendulum Wars, or more commonly known as DMR of course, providing a good balance between fire rate and accuracy, being a great middle ground between the long shot and the rifles, being used to often counter the Markser Mk1 marksman rifle of the UIR. Delta Squad's Jack robot was equipped with a Zapper stun gun towards the end of the Locust War. Baird had modified Jack to finally be able to become an offensive asset to Delta Squad, becoming an even more important asset as they fought their way to free Adam Fenix to finally put an end to the Locust War. Just like the Locust, the COG also used frag grenades, or bolo grenades, to deadly effect. It has seen different iterations in its design throughout the years, but during the Locust War, they were extremely valuable to the Gears, as they were able to be thrown into and close emergence holes. A grenade used by the COG's Onyx Guard were the beacon grenades. After being thrown, the beacon would allow allies to spot enemies. With a radar holographic display, spotted enemies could be spotted through walls and other hard surfaces. The COG medics and the Onyx Guard used stim gas grenades to heal or revive downed teammates. This was a grenade that released a blue cloud of gas called stim. A toxic gas grenade manufactured by the New Hope Research Facility as a failsafe against Patient Zero Ukon was the cytostatic gas grenade. Made from two chemicals, fluorosil and RZ50, a toxic gas that could melt flesh in a near instant. This would be used specifically to counter Ukon's accelerated healing effects. A non-lethal grenade used by the COG, however, were the smoke grenades, basically living up to its name, discharging a thick grey smoke that obscured the vision of anyone inside or looking outside the cloud of smoke. An improvised incendiary device used by the Gears during the Pendulum Wars were the Molotov cocktails. These would be used by the Gears to take out the UIR's Paria tanks by tossing the Molotov cocktails into the tank's air vent and lighting the tank on fire. A weapon of mass destruction that predated the Hammer of Dawn network was the light mass missile. These missiles drew on the near limitless power of Imulsion and were considered to be one of the COG's most dangerous weapons. There were different yields of the missile, but generally the light mass missile would require a targeting beacon and a remote control in order to launch. It would draw power from refined emulsion, and upon detonation would release a crazy amount of heat. The missile was accompanied by a cluster of smaller missiles that broke off before detonation for maximum impact. Just like the light mass missile, the light mass bomb was created from refined emulsion. It is a bomb, but it functioned as a cluster of highly explosive guided missiles. A very destructive weapon when used effectively, as evidenced through the light mass offensive, as Delta Squad deployed the light mass bomb to destroy the outer hollows. But to be used effectively, the light mass bomb required an immense amount of data on the area between the launch point and targets, in order to guide the individual projectiles. The COG used ball turrets to defend important buildings, such as fortresses or bunkers. These were series of large defensive, spherical turrets that had a full 360-degree coverage of fire. The ball turrets were autonomous and ran on a complex computer system. The ball turrets were a huge asset for the COG during the Pendulum Wars. Another defensive unit that the COG used to defend their fortifications and emplaced bunkers against the UIR was a defense missile system. This was a series of extremely large missile artillery batteries. The weapon's missile ammunition is stored in an underground storage connected to a bunker, which provides protection against counter-battery fire. The missile turret covered a 360-degree ground-to-air coverage and could hold up to 12 missiles at a time. The size of the missiles made them exceptionally dangerous to armoured vehicles, but the missiles weren't always accurate. The COG and UIR both used torpedoes to sink any type of naval vessel, from simple merchant ships to warships. They were used in explosive fashion by submarines and some warships, and there were no ways to counter an active torpedo other than making it hit another object that was in the way. The blowtorch, or repair tool, was a handy device used to repair fortifications and turrets. The blonde genius Baird would often be seen to carry the blowtorch. The gears had many ammunition crates, whether they were boxes, magazines or cases, providing ammunition for the majority of the weapons manufactured by the COG. Propane tanks were used by the COG as dangerous makeshift explosives during the Pendulum Wars. They were also used after Emergence Day by the Gears, as well as the Stranded. For the Stranded, it was an alternative fuel source, or to use them as explosive traps, but for the Gears, it was used to light the tanks up, to provide light, to avoid being eaten alive by the krill. And finally, for the COG Weapons, we'll circle all the way back to Imulsion, with the targeted radiation weapon, which was the Imulsion countermeasure weapon, created by Professor Adam Fenix. This was created to destroy Imulsion cells, and to stop the Lambent pandemic that was spreading across Zera. The humans were ultimately successful in activating the weapon. The Lambent were vaporized by the Imulsion countermeasure, while the Locust were neutralized and forced into evolution due to Imulsion being in their genetic code. The body armor worn by Gear soldiers of the Coalition of Ordered Governments are some of the most unique armor sets and designs in any form of media. Throughout the Gears of War expanded universe, there are many different cool designs and iterations. We begin with the most common armor in the COG army, and this is known as the Standard Infantry Armor, also known as the Trooper Armor. It is a light shade of blue with a black crimson omen between the armor seals on the front. Most Gear soldiers are seen to have this armor equipped, from Anthony and Benjamin Carmine to Min and so on. The armor comes with a selection of helmets that come with a built-in filter. While the helmets are standard issue, many Gears chose not to wear them as some felt that the optics hindered their field of view, or they found the helmet to be a nuisance altogether. Dom said to Ben Carmine that he never wore a helmet because he wouldn't be able to see Locust snipers well. This unfortunately was a slight dig, as Anthony Carmine was domed in the head by a Locust sniper, and he happened to wear a helmet. The armor though is so strong and thick that multiple shots from an assault rifle give only bruises to the wearer. And the torso part of the armor is more heavily armored than the rest of the body, offering decent protection to vital organs, but not sacrificing mobility by bogging down the limbs. Then there's the cadet armor, which is usually worn by newly enlisted Gears. This set lacks the shoulder pads normally found in the more common trooper variety, and is overall more lightweight and flexible. The reason for this is to better accommodate Gears in training, so they could get used to working around the much heavier and standard issue trooper armor. Therefore, cadet armor offers less protection, but is much lighter and easier to manufacture. We see Baird and Cole use this armor set in Gears of War Judgment. There is also the female Gears armor, which is pretty much a scaled down version of the standard infantry armor. The leg armor and boots are smaller. The chest plate is also smaller, with a lower cut collar. It has a thinner waist section, and the gauntlets are also thinner but longer than the standard male Gear version. The helmets worn by female Gears are the same as their male counterparts. However, some Gears, due to a lack of supplies or personal preference, had customized their armor. Some Gears like the Coltrane wore mixed and matched pieces of armor from different armor variants. Many stranded conscripts from Operation Lifeboat such as Dizzy had crude makeshift armor, since supplies went to the frontline troops and not the support units. Garen Paddock was seen to wear his UIR modified custom armor as well. However, some Gears such as Ty Kaliso had made additions to their armor. Ty's armor had been dubbed Hunter Armor to better suit Ty's native cultural clothing on Pahanu. But some Gears that were left behind during Emergence Day and the Hammer of Dawn counterattack such as Bernadette Mataki, had to do field repairs to their armor whilst on the move to the Jacinto Plateau. In the summer, due to the hot climate on Sierra, the Gears would use a different type of armor, a stripped down version of the standard COG armor. This was known as hot weather armor. Delta Squad and others were seen wearing this armor in Gears 3. It is sleeveless and uses a less bulky chest piece with thinner leg and foot armor to provide comfort for the Gears in high temperatures. It is slightly weaker than the standard armor due to less protective plating, but is mostly the same. As another consequence, Gears couldn't carry as much ammunition as their standard armor could. COG combat medics also wore a variant of this armor that was painted white, with 2 blue asterisks on the front and back of the torso piece. Medic armor comes equipped with medical and military supplies, due to the roles of medics being frontline combat doctors. As such, medic armor prioritized more on stocking up medicinal equipment than ammunition. We also have cold weather armor. As its name implies, this armor is worn by Gears during missions that take place on Arctic, tundra and sub-zero environments. The undersuit is thick to ensure proper heat insulation, whilst the armor is painted white and grey for better environmental camouflage. Most importantly though, this armor has an inner thermal heater to better warm up the gear in such extreme weather conditions. Because of the heating suit plus the thicker clothing, cold weather armor is much more heavier than trooper armor. The Ranger armor is a lightweight variation worn by scouts of the Coalition of Ordered Governments. Gabe Diaz, who was part of the COG Engineering Corps, was seen to wear a Ranger armor set that was heavily upgraded. These armor sets provide the most joint flexibility of any armor set, apart from the commando variations, which we'll get to in a moment. This is because of the need for scouts to remain hidden whilst running fast. There are destroyer armor sets, which are heavy duty armor worn by Gears who operate heavy weaponry, such as mulchers and grenade launchers. Sid Redburn was seen to wear the destroyer armor. These armors are thick and reinforced with a noticeable neck guard and integrated rebars to protect the gear from explosives and ricocheting shrapnel. Shoulder pads are also thicker with the thigh and leg armor showing increased armor thickness. The increased level of protection also means that destroyer gears could withstand impacts far greater than normal armor. While it offers increased protection, destroyer armor are also incredibly heavy, slowing the wearer down and tiring the gear soldier out. There are the iconic veteran armor sets, which are most notably worn by Marcus Fenix and Victor Hoffman in Gears 1 and 2. This armor allows a gear to carry even more equipment and supplies, at the cost of increased weight and mobility stress. Due to this, the veteran armor is only utilized in extensive campaigns, when immediate resupplies are not always guaranteed. This armor has a bulky hunchback appearance, due to large glowing straps along the shoulders, that may actually be an extra backpack attachment on the standard issue COG armor. Armor worn by the naval branch of the Coalition of Ordered Governments Corps of Marines were of course known as Marine armor. Marine armor is more silver in colour compared to the standard issue COG variants. A symbol of the COG Navy is etched on the breastplate, while the 2 circular seals are replaced with a more angular seal. Marine armor boasts an ammunition belt and pockets, which allow the Marines to hold more ammunition and military equipment than the standard gear. Marine armor is also more streamlined than normal variants. This is to complement the need for a Marine to swim in either emergencies or underwater operations. Due to their naval presence, it is deduced that Marine armor comes equipped with a standard issue oxygen respirator in the helmet for underwater operations. Another unique variation was the commando armor, worn by commandos during the Pendulum Wars. Their armor included special chest-mounted knives, backpacks, medical kits, and anything a gear needed out in the field. Commando armor was more stripped down in appearances, and the colour far more dulled in contrast to the standard issue armour. This was done for covert operations, in which commando units will try to camouflage themselves and blend into the environments behind enemy lines. Dom and Hoffman were 2 gears who were known to wear the commando armour set. There was another armour set seen in Gears Tactics, which is called the Delta armour. These armour sets are used by high-ranking gears on unorthodox terrain and unconventional warfare. These are often dark blue in colour. Gears who usually wear this armor venture into harsh locations with little logistical support, such as ammunition and supplies. As such, Delta armor is equipped with more ammo pouches, extra canteens, and ammo belts than usual, which allows them to carry further consumables in emergency needs. Delta armor provides a good balance of both stealth and protection, as this set would usually be worn in a savanna or jungle. We also have Hivebuster armor. These are specialized armor sets used by the Hivebusters on their suicide mission to destroy a swarm hive from the inside out. The olive green armor is made to be incredibly light and slim in order to maximize speed to ensure the Hivebuster can escape the hive at the expense of protection. The Hivebuster armor also has the addition of a Velcro piece in front of the chest armor. This piece is used to carry the Hivebuster's venom bomb, a small chemical weapon of mass destruction that is instrumental in destroying the hive from the inside. Finally, we have the Onyx Guard armor, worn by the elite Onyx Guard of the coalition of ordered governments. Their armor is completely black, hence the name Onyx, with the exception of the glowing eyes of their helmets, a single glowing strip down the center of the chest plate, and 2 glowing spots on the back shoulder blades. Onyx Guard armor also covers the wearer completely, as opposed to most other COG suits. There appears to be more armor plates, meaning that the Onyx Guard armor is much more stronger and durable than the standard COG armor. As such, Onyx Guard armor is far more expensive to produce due to the high quality materials needed to make these suits. Our little robot helper that we see throughout the Gears of War universe, being issued to elite and high level squads such as Delta Squad, becoming an indispensable robot for the coalition of ordered governments. Some may call him Jack, but I call him the MVP. Firstly, what are Jacks? Well, they are mass-produced, military utility jack-of-all-trades robots, or known simply as Jack, acting as general use assistants for elite squads, being able to access encrypted files, locked electronic systems, having built-in communication systems, providing light, giving limited medical treatments, outfitted with cloaking devices, and most importantly, ripping that damn door that's in the way.
Jack, rip that door.
Jacks were incorporated into the COG military during an unknown time period, assumed to be at some point during the Pendulum Wars, as prior to the Pendulum Wars, technology wasn't very advanced on the planet's era. Jack robot units were very important to the COG, being widely produced, and were pivotal in helping the COG win the war against the UIR. The UIR were intrigued by the Jacks and sought after the robotic units, as of course the two superpowers in the form of the COG and the UIR were at different stages in technological advancements and competed against one another to gain the upper hand. During Operation Leveler in the Battle of Ashfall Fields, multiple Jacks were used in the infiltration of the Ashfall Point research facility, commanded to open the gates, open locked doors, and most importantly, retrieve the classified information about the Hammer of Dawn from the UIR databases, helping the COG steal the WMD technology to end the war once and for all. After Emergence Day, when the Locust Horde had begun the genocidal fight against humanity, Jack units rapidly decreased in numbers and therefore became much more valuable to the Gears. The Locust Horde were known to use the spoils of war and victory in cities to strip and take the majority of military and civilian technological equipment and resources, repurposing it for their own advancements. For instance, capturing and using human weapons, such as the Nasher shotguns and the Lancer assault rifles, repurposing armor, and even modifying weapons, such as the UIR's Markser rifle, turning it into the breech shot rifle. It is likely that the Locust Horde could have stolen some Jack Geobot technology as spoils of war for their own war effort, but it's never been expanded upon as to what the Locust would have done with stolen Jack and other Geobot technology. By the end of the Locust War, the only surviving Jackbot was Mr. Jack himself of Delta Squad. All of his brothers, or rather robots, in arms, were decimated throughout the war, and Jack was greatly appreciated and worked on by Baird. Jack had broken down, and Baird had found parts to fix and upgrade him, to help make a difference in the final battle against the Locust and the Lambent, giving him the ability to actually stun enemies this time around. A side note is that Jack units have been shown to have a bit of a personality, with confused or sad beeps when unable to get a job done, for instance, being unable to cut through a heavily fortified door. So they seem to have basic emotions programmed into them and are greatly appreciated by the Gears, with some squads even giving them different names, such as Hoffman's bot by the name of Bruce in the Pendulum Wars, or Kilo Squad's bot called Troy in Gears Judgment. The Locust Horde were known to use various hollow creatures as vehicles, machines, and weapons of war. But what about the ground, sea and air vehicles at the COG's disposal? Let's firstly look into the ground vehicles that the COG used during the Pendulum Wars and the Locust War. The Armadillo, a heavily armoured APC, or also known as Armoured Personnel Carrier used by the Gears. This was the primary ground transport for the COG. Now the Armadillos were designed for combat and all-terrain, and were used throughout the Locust War, for general combat, assault operations, scouting, patrols, transport and evacuation of civilians. The Armadillos were heavily armoured, and the armoured hull exterior could resist enemy fire. It also has antennae at the back for short and long range communication, a pod for Jack, a searchlight and various weaponry when required. Now there were older APCs used in the Pendulum Wars, but one would assume that they were phased out for the newer Armadillos.
Look out below, Delta. Incoming Centaur.
Control, I requested a pickup, not a drop-off.
The Centaur, a light tank that had large wheels in the place of tracks, turning it into a four-wheel drive, which was different to the older COG tanks used during the Pendulum Wars against the UIR. It is possible that the Centaur came to replace the old COG tanks in the Locust War, perhaps due to the lack of resources, as we don't see the older COG tanks with tracks in the Locust War, but there were a few Centaurs used towards the end of the Pendulum Wars, once again with a reinforced armoured hull, but also equipped with a single high-velocity cannon that fired high explosive shells. Although extremely powerful and durable, the Centaurs were not indestructible, as showcased by Keita Scourge, who sliced a Centaur tank in half with his dual chainsaw staff, as well as the Centaurs being vulnerable to heavy cannons and missile fire. But the Centaur was supposedly easy to repair, as evidenced by Damon Baird anyway. The Centaur was also equipped with a nitro-boosted engine, which allowed for quick escapes, or boosting over deep fissures in the surface, much to Baird's displeasure.
Only one way to go now!
Are you crazy, Marcus?
Oh, shit! We're not gonna make it!
Here we go!
That's it! No more jumps! Alright?
Ha ha! Come on, baby, let's do it again! Uh-oh, I think Brad just pissed himself!
Salt derricks, or also known as rigs. They were actually originally designed for mining emulsion. At this time they were just called derricks, but for Operation Hollow Storm in Gears of War 2, the COG reassigned them to transport troops, militarizing the derricks into what we know as assault derricks. They were used for troop and supply transport, as well as what we mainly know them for, ground lift deployment of Gears into the Hollow, to infiltrate the home of the Locust Horde and begin Operation Hollow Storm. The assault derrick crew consisted of a single driver. When a lot of stranded were conscripted into the COG army during Operation Lifeboat, many of them became assault derrick drivers, including Dizzy Wallin. But the derricks did have vulnerabilities, such as being toppled by Brumacs, and being destroyed by Tickers or Nemesists. But if your name is Ty Kaliso, then I think you'll be fine. The assault derricks had a mounted chain gun directly over the driver cabin and were able to carry many gears on board. But shortly before Operation Hollowstorm began, many Locust grapplers had grappled on board and overran the crew of some of the assault derricks. And the stranded drivers, like Dizzy, tended to give their derricks names such as Betty, Marilyn, Ava, and Lola. But COG ground vehicles that were even bigger than the assault derricks were the Mammoths. These were multi-purpose rigs for bridge laying, bulldozing, night convoys, and much more. Exceptionally large, even dwarfing an assault derrick, and as big as ships in size, and they were even capable of crossing rivers without sinking. Cargo trucks, used by the COG to transport personnel, equipment, supplies, and other cargo across the battlefield. These were supply vehicles that came in different shapes and sizes, depending on the model, and were essential to the COG army in order for them to transport all of their equipment to bases, other vehicles, and gears. The engineering corps also used a fleet of cargo trucks to deliver cargo to the COG army. The TACCOM vehicle, which as the name suggests, was a comms and commands vehicle which had a main purpose to locate the whereabouts of gears and the other COG units in the battlefield, armed primarily with a large communication relay dish and a map console to locate military units. They are similar in some aspects to the Armadillo, except they are 2 to 3 times bigger in size. TACCOM vehicles can provide TACCOM for gears, can transfer information, and increase audio range for gears as well. They are of huge logistical importance to the COG army. Now, in terms of ground vehicles that deserve an honourable mention, but are not often seen in the Gears of War games or media, are the following. EMCVs, or Emergency Management Command Vehicles, designed for commanding response teams for natural disasters. Pack horses, small 4-wheeled vehicles, the mounted machine gun on the roof, used by the COG primarily during the Pendulum Wars. Rat bikes, used for fast insurgent missions and scouting purposes. Now, they were often seen with a detachable sidecar and were seen in moments, such as during Delta Squad's mission to Montevado. The sidecar had a large cannon attached to it and was actually able to spin 270 degrees around. Rat trucks, vehicles used in the Pendulum Wars, but also played a part during the Lambent pandemic in Gears of War 3. A 4-wheel drive with a crudely repaired flatbed with a roll bar. The Silverbacks, one-manned exosuits. It was originally a loader mech suit, but was later of course militarized. Equipped with a heavy rocket launcher and a stripped-down version of the Mulcher. Also equipped with a shield mode, a secondary mode designed to provide extra cover and fire support. It has the ability to spread its leg armor out, effectively creating cover for other COG soldiers to hide behind, but at the cost of movement. And while in use, the Silverback is able to roadie run and curb stomp enemies. As well as the Tyro Pillar, the train seen in Gears of War 1 during the Light Mass Offensive, ridiculously fast and was extremely long, with over 19 cars. Before Emergence Day, it can be assumed that this was only a commercial train, but after E-Day was used to transport gears and perhaps food, as we see boxes of Gears Crunch cereal being destroyed by a Locust Berserker when on board the Tyro Pillar. Moving on to the air vehicles of the COG, the most notable are of course the King Ravens, the backbone of the COG's Air Corps, becoming an indispensable asset for the COG military after its introduction towards the latter years of the Pendulum Wars. Used for transporting gears in and out of war zones, supporting troops on the ground, and used for assault on enemy infantry and the Locust's air troops and creatures, such as the Reavers, as well as being used to help evacuate civilians. The King Ravens were equipped with frontal machine guns and chain gun attachments on the sides, but they were vulnerable to the Locust's exploding nemesis and rockets from Brumacs and so on. However, to put into perspective of how pivotal the King Ravens were to the COG, here is a quote from Dom Santiago when thinking about the Ravens. Ravens reassured you that the good guys had arrived and were either going to give you something you badly needed or get you out of somewhere you didn't want to be. There was nothing not to love about them. Their Chaka Chaka engine note alone was enough to make hearts leap. Their rough streaks were sacred, and their pilots, were all uniformly insane. Now there were a few variants of the King Ravens. Firstly, the King Raven gunship. Designed for close air support, accommodated with extra weapon hardpoints, thicker armour, and a larger fuel tank, alongside laser-guided anti-tank missiles, rocket pods, and a UAV filter-equipped searchlight. They were likely the COG's best bet against the Brumacs when tackling the beasts from the air, as well as the dual-rotor Lightmass bomber, a specialised King Raven seen at the end of Operation Hollow Storm in Gears of War 2, designed to carry a particularly powerful bomb, in this case, the Lightmass bomb. This King Raven was larger, with an additional rotor, and the side doors were closed, with no side-mounted weaponry. There were also silverback carrier King Ravens. One was seen during the evacuation of the city of Alima, dropping off 2 silverbacks with Onyx Guards to stop General Rahm and his forces. But before the use of King Ravens, there were some older models of helicopters used by the COG during the Pendulum Wars. The Corva was used in the Pendulum Wars, and was entering its final stages of use 17 years before Emergence Day. It was the workhorse of the COG's Air Corps during the Pendulum Wars, but it was slow and used up a lot of fuel, hence why it was eventually phased out by the newer King Raven. But the Corvas were still occasionally used after as well, although not often. They were mainly used as a transport helicopter. As well as the Tern, another transport helicopter used by the COG in the Pendulum Wars, but also served as an attack helicopter, as evidenced by the 2 chain guns on the sides. Terns were also eventually phased out by the King Ravens as well. And then we have the sea vehicles used by the NCOG. The sea-based model of submarines were used by the Special Operations Forces of the COG Navy in the Pendulum Wars. In Gears of War 3, we saw Delta Squad use an old submarine to dive underneath the Maelstrom barrier of the island of Azora. In the Pendulum Wars, they were used by the COG in covert operations, and therefore were smaller than conventional submarines. They were also equipped with manned ball turrets, attached via a hydraulic arm. We also have the Raven's Nest class of helicopter carrier ships, used by the NCOG, designed to store, transport and deploy helicopters onto the battlefield, equipped with advanced communication, navigation, defense systems and much more. During the Pendulum Wars, Raven's Nest class ships were the COG's most powerful marine assets. They carried thousands of gears, Ravens, and other equipment around the world with pure strength and confidence. RNCs could effectively stand against the UIR's impressive fleet, and were certainly critical to the war effort. But towards the end of the Locust War, helicopter carriers such as the CNV Sovereign became the home of thousands of COG refugees. After the sinking of Jacinto, it became a mobile base of the remains of the COG army, but it was eventually destroyed by the Lambent Leviathan. Another sea vehicle used by the NCOG were the Marlins, fast attack inflatable hovercrafts used by COG commandos for quick, stealthy, amphibious insertions into enemy territory. Several Marlins were also used in the assault on Asfo Point during Operation Leveler. The Marlins sported both an aerodynamic and hydrodynamic hull that allowed it to exceed average boat speeds, and could carry between 4 to 8 fully equipped gears at a time. The NCOG also used COG battleships, and these were the principal combat ships of the NCOG, as well as Sea Ravens, which was the NCOG's version of the King Raven, that could hold up to 1 Marlin attack boat. The NCOG Sea Ravens were able to land in water and transform into a mobile dock for Marlin attack boats. So that, my friends, is the full COG lore movie. I'll probably create an updated version of this in a few years' time, after Gears of War 6 releases, and once we get more lore introduced through comics and books. Drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this lore movie. If you want to support me and the channel further, then you can also become a channel member, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. Thank you so much for your support as always. I'm your host Stabs, and I will catch you guys next time.